Well, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you guys this morning? Good. Warm? Nice and warm? No, that's good. I'm going to give myself a little, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, a disclaimer here that when you're invited to talk about parenting, it's always a very daunting task. None of us really know exactly what we're doing when we have those little kids put in our arms for the first time. And so what I want to do this morning is talk very little bit about my experience as a father, a little bit more of my experience working with families over the last 20 years. But we're going to talk a lot about what Scripture has to say about parenting, because I think that's where the value is, and what I have to say today is what God has to say about our kids and how we are to raise our kids. My theme is God's vision for spiritual formation, and I am taking just one specific part of that we're going to talk about this morning, and we're going to talk about discipleship through discipline. We're going to talk about disciplining our kids. But before we get into that, Mike mentioned that Katie and I were married back in 2002, and we got a very generous gift from a man we'd only met one time. He gave us our honeymoon. He gave us a gift of a week in Cancun, Mexico, in this all-inclusive resort. And so we went to Cancun, and we had this wonderful week, and we just laid on the beach, and we laid in the warm sand, and you felt the cool breeze blow against your skin, and you'd walk out into the ocean, and you'd feel that water just lap against your legs, and you would hear that, at night. And it was just this incredibly relaxing and restful period. It was a huge blessing until the last day of our honeymoon, because we got on the plane and we began to take off, and because of a major malfunction at about 20,000 feet, we had to turn around and come back to Mexico, which really would be no big deal, except we were the very last flight out of Mexico before the hurricane hit. So we came back, and we were stuck in Mexico one more night to ride out a hurricane. And here's what I learned in that one night riding out a hurricane. I realized that the day before, what was so relaxing and so refreshing was very different the next day. But it was all the same stuff. It was the same sand, it was the same water, it was the same wind. But one was refreshing and relaxing and a blessing. The other was out of control. One brought blessing to our life. The other brought destruction to everything in its path. And as I've thought about that over the years, I started thinking, families can be very much like that. We see families that have a child that's born, and incredibly good things come with that child, right? Everybody rejoices when the family is born, and it's a blessing from the moment it arrives. And as that child grows and matures, it just seems to bring more and more and more blessing with it to everybody that it touches. But then there is the child that when it is born, it is celebrated at birth. But as that child gets older, rather than bringing joy and refreshment and blessing, that child brings heartache and pain and discouragement and destruction. And that child that you love becomes a hurricane. Now, I know that doesn't really sound very positive as we start this morning, but you and I both know that it's real, right? In my 20 years of ministry, I have watched children, or I've seen children being born, and all of the joy that comes with that. I've also seen children go to jail. And I've seen children become drug addicts, and I've seen children commit suicide. And I've seen all of the pain and destruction that comes with that. And none of those children were cursed from birth. None of those children ended up where they ended up because that was God's plan for their life. Now, there were a number of factors that probably went into each one of those in their own specific reality. But I think sometimes children end up the way they do in part because we as parents don't always know the best way to interact with our children in order to protect them the way God asks us to. And again, I want to give a disclaimer that I know that almost all parents are doing the very best that they can, right? We're all just trying to figure this out as we go along. And children, there's all kinds of influences on children. And so what I want to just talk about today is how do we do everything we can do to help our children become everything God wants them to become. So I want you to listen to what I have to say with that thought in mind, okay? The subtitle for our class this morning is Negligent Homicide or Vigilant Discipline. And I want to define those two terms really quickly. The International Encyclopedia of Justice Studies defines negligent homicide as the killing of another person through gross negligence or without malice or without intent. And basically what that means is somebody dies and you're at fault even though you never meant for it to happen. Right? There was no intent, there was no malice, there was no anger, there was no revenge. It just happened because you weren't paying attention. And we've all heard stories about that happening. Now, vigilant discipline, on the other hand, I'm going to give you a bit of a more biblical definition of this morning. But vigilant discipline is consistent observation and correction that is designed to produce a Christ-like change of behavior and character. And what I want you to understand is that in Scripture, these two things are very closely connected. And they either work against each other or influence the other. I think as we look at our society, we probably don't have to talk very long to know things are kind of spinning out of control more and more, right? I read an article a while back, and it was about a study that was done in the 1940s. And in this study, they sent out a survey to teachers, and they asked them to list your 7 biggest behavioral problems that you have with students. And this is what those teachers in the 1940s listed as the 7 biggest behavioral problems that they had to deal with. They said number 1 was talking. Number 2, chewing gum. Number 3, making noise. Number 4, running in the halls. Number 5, getting out of place in line. Number 6, wearing improper clothing. And number 7, not putting paper in the wastebasket. Those are the 7 biggest problems that they had to deal with in school. And you think, man, those were the good old days, right? It was pretty rough back then. And I think in general, our culture in the 1940s, especially the early 1940s, believed that discipline was very much the responsibility of husband and wife. That mom and dad worked together, and disciplining a child was a regular part of interacting within the home. Now, what history tells us is that really beginning in the late 1940s and for the next 2 decades, there became kind of a shift, and there was this general belief that, you know what, we shouldn't discipline our children, because when you discipline your child, you don't allow your child to be who they're supposed to be, right? You crush part of who they are, and they need to experience life. And if you discipline your child, you're going to break your child, and you can't possibly do that. Now, going back, the idea of breaking a child's will was thought of as kind of a positive thing. But going forward, it was viewed as controlling and negative, and some would even say it was abusive. So fast forward, 40 years later, we're in the 1980s, and this exact same question was asked of school teachers again. And they said, list the 7 top behavioral issues that you have to deal with in your school. And I want to point out that this was not a different country, it was not a different ethnicity, it was not a different age of students. There was nothing different in the groups that they polled except a 40-year cultural shift away from discipline. And here's what those teachers in the 1980s said. Our number 1 problem is drug abuse. Number 2, alcohol abuse. Number 3, pregnancy. Number 4, suicide. Number 5, rape. Number 6, assault and burglary. And number 7, arson. That was the 1980s. One teacher just about a year ago said, well, let me just tell you what we dealt with in our school just this past week. She said, this is what happened in the last week in our school. She said we had drug and alcohol use in the school bathroom. We had vaping in the bathroom. We had a student with an eating disorder. We had a student get an abortion. We had another that found out she was pregnant. We had a physical abuse within the home. We had one attempted suicide, and a child brought a gun to school. That was 1 week of school in 2017. Now you say, what in the world is going on here? How this huge swing of, where the very worst thing that a teacher has to deal with is talking and chewing gum, to now we get all the way over here where it's drug abuse and abortion and kids bringing weapons into school. How do we get there? Well, I would argue the problem didn't start in the schools. I would argue the problem started at home. The problem starts with parents who don't understand how to discipline their children, or who just simply don't discipline their children because of dysfunction or codependency that's taking place in their own lives. Now, we look at that list, right? All those things going on in school, and we say, well, what are we supposed to do about that? How can we change that in any way? And the truth of the matter is, we don't have a whole lot of control over what goes on out there, right? But we have an awful lot of control of what happens in here. We have a lot of control over what happens in our homes. And so I believe the more that we as the church can get really, really serious about listening to what God has to say when it comes to discipling and disciplining our children and raising our children, I believe the more that idea can spread into our culture, and this world can be blessed by the influence of Christ when they watch us and they see where families, where husbands and wives love each other. And where those parents lovingly and correctly discipline their kids. The Bible is very, very clear that God wants us to discipline our children. But here's what I love about the Bible, I think. This is what I love most about the Bible. God doesn't just say, you should do this. What God does is, you should do this, and let me tell you why you should do it, and let me tell you how you should do it. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning. And I want to always start with where God says, let me tell you why you should do it, because it's important to understand that, because discipline isn't easy, right? I don't know any parent, unless they are emotionally disturbed, who enjoys disciplining their kids. I think shared discipline responsibilities in our home. This is my wife Katie, by the way. But there's still the, you wait till dad gets home, right? That's the big discipline that has to happen. And I hate it. I hate having to discipline my kids. There's nothing else I would like to do less than that. And sometimes we go, man, it's just so hard, right? It's so hard we have our youngest daughter, she's really funny and she's really outgoing. And it was hard to discipline her because she would crack a joke or she would make a face, right? And she was just so cute and so cuddly. And man, you just think, I just can't discipline this little angel, right? Well, here's the deal. You need to understand that your children are like gremlins. You remember that movie, Gremlins? They are very cute and they're very cuddly, but if you don't do what you're supposed to do, and if you don't care for that thing the way you're supposed to care for it, something bad is really, really going to happen. So, we need to remember a couple of things of why we do what we're supposed to do. Okay, so I want to remind you of 3 things that God says in His Word why we should discipline our kids. And the first thing is, when I discipline my child, it is an act of life. It's an act of life for my kid. When you discipline your child, those of you who've had kids that maybe have grown up, and maybe you have grandkids now, or you have young kids at home, when you discipline your child, whether it's giving them a spanking or grounding them or taking away privileges, it is not uncommon for a child to act like you're absolutely killing them, right? Mm-hmm. My wife's family has a story of her oldest brother when he was a little kid getting taken out of church. And as he was leaving, he turned back to the church and he said, "Somebody help me, he's going to kill me." And all the church busted up laughing, But here's the thing. The Bible does not say that if you discipline your child, you'll kill them. But what the Bible does say is if you don't discipline your child, you could be killing them. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 18, the proverb writer says, discipline your son while there is still hope. Do not be the one who's responsible for his death. Now, we read that and you think, well, maybe that word death is meant to be symbolic. But I want to ask you, could it possibly be that he is saying, if we don't discipline our kids, they could die? I think that's very likely what he's saying. I knew kids growing up whose parents never disciplined them at all. You think of maybe you had this guy in your high school whose parents allowed him to drink at a very young age. And he was kind of the talk of the school. And everyone, man, that's so cool, man. He's got the best parents. They let him do whatever he wants. Nobody thinks it's cool when that kid wraps his car around a tree on the way home from a party, right? And obviously the kid is responsible for what he has done. But how as a parent can you not look back and say, that 12-year-old that I allowed to drink now dies at 16 in a drunk driving accident? How is that not my fault? Right? Now, most kids aren't going to die physically in a way that you can immediately look back and say, yeah, this was the cause of that. But this lack of discipline absolutely destroys people's lives. I'll give you one example. Our culture does not know how to have relationships anymore, right? Or a meaningful relationship anymore. Statistics say that if you get married today, there's a 50-50 chance that you'll stay married, right? So it's a coin flip that person that you said, I will love you forever, ends up being a person you hate forever, right? Now, can I tell you, I don't believe that problem starts in marriage. I think it starts in childhood. That problem starts when a child is allowed to behave in a horrible way, and mommy and daddy, because they love that special little bundle of joy so much, they just let them get away with everything. But then those disobedient and manipulative and self-centered things that child is allowed to do by mommy and daddy, when that person gets married to some unsuspecting victim, they're not going to put up with it, right? They're not going to put up with it very long. And so that poor spouse divorces the adult brat who was indulged when they were a young brat, right? And I'm not trying to call them names, I'm trying to be descriptive. And the cause of the problem, even years later in their adulthood, is a lack of discipline in their life. The writer of Proverbs says, you need to make sure that you discipline your child while there is hope. In Proverbs chapter 22, if you go to the next slide, he says, start off the children in the way that they should go, and when they are old, they will not turn from it. They said, while there's still hope, and whatever the opposite of is when they're old. What the proverb writer says is you need to discipline your children when they're young. And the younger you start, the better off you are. You need to do that. And the implication is discipline them while they're young so that you won't be a party to their death when they're older. Proverbs 23, it says 29 on there, but it's Proverbs 23. The proverb writer says, don't fail to discipline your children. I love this. This is the Good News Bible. It says, they won't die if you spank them. Physical discipline may well save them from death. Oftentimes we are compelled by what culture says about discipline. I heard even a commercial that was running this week on the radio that talked about how you should and should not discipline your children. I believe we need to make sure that we are responding to our children in the way that we discipline them based upon what God says in Scripture, not based upon psychology and culture. And I truly believe this. I believe that there is probably no area in life where we separate and we segment what the Bible says from how we're going to choose to respond than when it comes to raising our kids. I truly believe that. In my experience with church families, there is very, very little difference between how the world views and executes discipline and how members of God's kingdom do. And what that tells me is that we have been pushed and we have been molded and shaped not by the words of God, but by the demands and the expectations of culture. And so the proverb writer says, hey, disciplining your children is not going to kill them. In fact, it can actually give them life. You remember, if you go to the next slide, this is a quote out of the New Testament of the Ten Commandments. And you remember the Ten Commandments say, honor your father and mother. And then it actually has a promise with it, so that you will live well and have a long life. This is the first command that has a promise with it. But it's not just a promise for this life. It's not just, we want our kids to live well. We want our kids to certainly outlive us, but we want them to live a long, good life. But, man, we want our kids to live for eternity, right? And honoring their father and mother, learning respect and obedience to correction and discipline. The Bible says that's life-giving, both in this life and in the life to come. So it's a gift of life when I discipline my child. Secondly, when I discipline my child, it is an act of learning. It's an act of learning. There are some things that a child will never learn outside of discipline. Isn't that true? In the book of Hebrews, there's a whole section on discipline. And the church is going through a really hard time, and they're really upset about it. And the writer of Hebrews says, hey, you guys need to think differently about how you're responding to these difficult times, because this is God disciplining you. And what God understands is that there are just some things that we will never learn through just a simple, pleasant conversation. Right? We're just too thick-headed. Have you ever had somebody say, I just got to learn things the hard way, right? I'm always like, technically you don't have to. You can just say, okay, I'll do that and you'll be fine. But we choose to learn things the hard way. But if you think about your own life, I'm almost willing to bet there are some things that you've learned in your life that you only learned through difficulty and pain. And there may be even things that you look back and you would say, you know what, I never want to go through that again, but I would not trade it for anything else, because what I learned out of that was so valuable for me. It's the pain that can speak into stubbornness and rebellion and blindness. And sometimes you only learn things through discipline and through hardship. And the very same thing is true with our children. There are lessons that your child will never ever learn in life unless you're willing to allow them to, or you're willing to facilitate them in experiencing some discomfort and some difficulty in life. Now, what do they learn? Well, let me give you three things very, very quickly. First, when I discipline my child can learn to be obedient. My child can learn to be obedient. Hebrews 12:11, the Hebrew writer says, it's never fun to be corrected, but it's always painful. But if we learn to obey by being corrected, we will do right. So God says, listen, your child is never going to like discipline, so just get over it, right? Sometimes we're like, I just want to find a discipline that my child really likes. That's called enabling, by the way. They're never going to like it. So God says, just get over that and discipline them, because they'll be able to learn to do what's right. And I truly believe that much of our children's happiness, much of our happiness in life is based on knowing and doing what's right. As our child gets older, what's going to bless my two daughters and my son as they get married, as they are husbands and wives, what's going to bless them the most is that they've learned what is right, and they've learned to do what's right. And they've learned that, hey, guess what? If I do what's right, more than likely blessings are going to come from that. And if I do what's wrong, there are penalties that come with that. Because that's basically how life works, with very few exceptions. So when I discipline my child, I'm teaching them to be obedient to God. And the Bible says that it is in obedience that God is able to bless us. The second thing I give to my child, or I teach my child when I discipline them, is they can learn to be respectful. They can learn to be respectful. In Scripture, respect is learned through discipline. And it's not learned instantly. It's learned over a long period of time. I love this passage, Hebrews 12:9. We have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. I remember my dad was spanking me. Respect was not real high on my list at the moment, right? Dad, you took my car away. Man, I just have deep respect for you, sir. Right? That was not how I felt, right? So what he's talking about here is later on down the road, right? And I think we know that. You remember the teacher that you had maybe in high school or in college that was the coolest teacher in the world because they didn't expect anything of you and you got an A no matter what, right? You didn't have to do any work. You didn't have to turn in any assignments, and you're just like, man, this is the greatest teacher ever. And then you graduated and you realized, well, I can't really fill out a college application, or I don't know how to write a resume. And you think, man, that teacher really wasn't my friend. Didn't help me at all. Or you think of those parents that you thought, man, they just let their kid do everything. I wish my parents were like that. My parents are so harsh. But now you look at that kid and he's all grown up and he's addicted, or he's endangered because of the behavior that his parents let him get involved in. And they didn't do it because they loved him. They did it because they loved the feeling of love that they got from him. And rather than functioning the way God called them to, they experienced dysfunction. And they put their own love ahead of what was best for their child. And now their child has a hard time even liking his parents, much less respecting his parents. So when you discipline your kid in the proper way, your kid can learn to be respectful. Thirdly, when I discipline my child, the Bible says my child can learn to be secure. Sometimes I think if we believe that if I discipline my child, it's going to make them insecure. But the opposite is actually true in Scripture. Again, going back to Hebrews 12, verse 11, this is the section on discipline in the early church. The writer says, it's never fun to be corrected, but if we learn to obey by being corrected, we will do right, and what will happen? We will live at peace. He says discipline, when it is meted out correctly, allows a person to know how to behave rightly. So he says they'll know what to do in their marriage, and they'll know what to do as a mom or dad, and they'll know what to do as an employee or as a student. But he says not only is there practical benefit from it, he says there's also emotional benefit as well, and that is you'll be able to live at peace. And can I just let you know this morning that peace and security are absent from a lot of teenagers' lives. And it doesn't matter what kind of house they live in or what kind of neighborhood they grew up in. All of them are clamoring for something that they can just feel secure in. And much of what they're falling into is just because of insecurity in their life. That's how it was for me. And that's how it is for most of the kids that I know and love and watch. I've come to believe that the rules of God and the discipline of a parent are designed not to make a child feel insecure, as our culture would tell us, but rather to make them feel secure. I kind of think discipline of a parent that a parent provides is really equivalent to guardrails on a mountain road. You ever driven on a windy mountain road way up high in the mountains? I just grabbed that picture off the internet, but I have. And I've been on that mountain road where you look down and it's just down, right? And it's terrifying. You're driving like 10 miles an hour and you're trying to stay as far over as you possibly can. Now, I have also driven on roads that are even higher and more windy, but I was absolutely comfortable because there was one difference, and that's because there was a guardrail that went all the way around the side of the road. And with one, I was white knuckling it, and I was just as nervous as I could possibly be. With the other one, I was relaxed and I could enjoy the beautiful view because I knew I had something there that would protect me against myself, that would protect me against my stupidity or my neglect. There was a protective mechanism in place. And I believe discipline provides for your child that guardrail that then allows them to function free and relaxed because they know somebody's looking after me. Somebody, if I begin to get out of control, I'm not just stuck with depending on my own foolish decisions. I've got somebody who will step in and who will protect me and who will guide me. And can I just ask you, do your kids have that? When you discipline your child biblically and properly, You provide security for them because it's an act of learning. All right, number 3, when I discipline my child, not only is it an act of life and learning, it's an act of love. It's an act of love. In Proverbs 3:12, the proverb writer says, the Lord corrects those he loves, just as parents correct the child they delight in. Now, sometimes we have this feeling for love for our kids that we're like, I can't discipline them, right? I just can't do that, right? And yet, we still want to call that love. But the Bible says, no. If you delight in your child, if you really love your child, what you do is discipline your child. Discipline is an act of love, and a lack of discipline is the opposite of love. Finish this sentence if you would. Spare the rod, spoil the child. You know what passage that comes from? It does not come from any passage. That saying is not in the Bible. Do you know that? Let me tell you what the Bible does say. Go to the next one. Those who spare the rod of discipline hate their child. Now, we have changed that because it sounds a lot better to say, well, I just kind of spoiled him, right? And we don't get the picture of rancid, rotting meat, right? We're just like, oh, it's just so precious. What the Bible says is spare the rod, you hate your child. You hate your child. But he says those who love their children care enough to discipline them. Love and hate put together in the very same sentence. But it's the one who is the disciplinarian who is the lover, and the one who doesn't discipline who is the hater. It is an act of love when I discipline my child. And those of us who had godly parents who disciplined us in a godly way, we can look back now and say, man, I'm so grateful that I had parents who loved me enough to allow me to not like them for a while. I had parents who loved me enough to allow me to be mean to them and to say hateful things to them because they knew what was best for me. And they were willing to sacrifice for that. It's an incredible act of love. So God says, listen, there's some things you need to know if you're going to discipline your children and why we do it. But then he also says there's some things you need to know about how to discipline your child. So I'm going to jump on those. I'm going to go through them really fast because we're speeding through our time here. But if we're going to be vigilant, and again, vigilant means constantly aware, not negligent. If I'm going to be vigilant about discipline, there's 5 things I got to do. First, I must be clear. I must be clear. And what that means is that I make policy and penalties understandable. This is one thing I see all the time, and to be honest, in my own home even, is that sometimes we're just not clear about what's right and wrong and what's expected and what happens if you don't live up to the problem. So what we need to do, especially if we have children who are a challenge, we need to sit down with that child and we need to write out a crime and punishment list. If you do this, here's what's going to happen. And guess what that does? When you do that and you agree upon it and you hang it up on the refrigerator, that cuts out a whole lot of disagreement. That cuts out a whole lot of fighting. And it makes life a whole lot easier. In John chapter 12, Jesus, if you remember, he says, I didn't come into the world to judge the world, but to save the world, right? And he talks about how, listen, I'm not here to condemn and judge everybody. I don't have time for that right now. I've got a very short amount of time. So he says, here's what I came to do. I came to tell you about an incredible opportunity that is available to you and the consequences that happen if you don't take advantage of this opportunity. He says in John 12, verse 48, after he said that, he said, there is a judge for the one who rejects me and does not accept my words. It's the very word which I spoke that will condemn them. So he says, look, you need to accept me. And then he says, this is what acceptance of me looks like. And he's very, very clear about that. And he says, but you also need to understand you will meet condemnation when you stand before the Lord if you do not do this. The Bible is very clear on that, right? No question about that. If you do this, there will be blessing. If you don't do it, there will be consequences. Isn't it strange that God goes to such an extreme with us to make sure we know what is right and what is wrong and the potential of what can happen in our life, both now and forever, if we do what is right or we do what is wrong. And then yet with our kids, we just sort of expect them to figure it out on their own. We just expect them to know. Oh yeah, well we'll get to that when you do it, right? We'll talk about that. We just expect them to figure it out, to know. We need to be very clear. And again, that cuts out the fighting and the arguing and the discussion. Because here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. If you do what you can't do, here's what's going to happen. So we need to be very, very clear. Number 2, I must be commensurate. I must be clear and I must be commensurate. What does commensurate mean? It means the punishment should fit the crime. I think as parents, sometimes it's easy to get angry and frustrated, right? And everything our kid does becomes a capital offense, right? You know, you punched your mother in the face, you are dead, right? You spilled your milk, you are dead, right? And it's just all kind of the same. But what we need to understand is really in Scripture and in life, there are some things that are important, and then there are some things that are more important, right? And some things are more important because of the concepts that they teach of, listen, you need to know this. This is really important for your life. Or they're important because sometimes the consequences that come with it, whether immediate or long-term consequences, some things are more important than others. So we need to make sure that our punishment is commensurate for the crime. Punishment for a child that is rebellious and punches his mom in the nose is different than a child that's just irresponsible and forgetful, right? A kid throws a temper tantrum, grabs his milk and chucks it at dad's head. That's different than the clumsy kid who spills the milk because they're clumsy. And now, that child may still need to be disciplined. It's just done differently. Rebellion, when you throw it intentionally, there's going to be a stiffer punishment than just carelessness or whatever it may be, right? Because I need to help you with your rebellion. That's not going to work in your life. But I may say, hey, I also need to help you with your carelessness. Because that's going to give you trouble as well. But they do not elicit the same kind of response. All right, let's jump ahead. The main point on that is just there's differences. But rebellion, the punishment has to be more severe because the rebellion will destroy the life of the rebellious one eventually. I'll say, number 3, I must be controlled. I must be controlled. If I lose control, I lose influence. You cannot positively influence a person you're trying to control if you're out of control. Now you might get fear, and you might even get behavior modification, but you will also eventually get resentment and rebellion. Paul says in Colossians 3:21, and he says it specifically to fathers, fathers, do not embitter your children or they will become discouraged. Now, what that might mean is I'm just way too hard on my child. I don't know if you guys heard the story of the Alabama quarterback, and the story was when he threw an interception, his dad would whip him with a belt, right? That may be a little too harsh, or a lot too harsh, perhaps. So maybe I'm just way too hard. Maybe I'm way too nitpicky on unimportant little things. Just stupid little things. But Paul says, listen, if you do that with your child, they are going to be discouraged, and discouraged people give up. So he says, don't do that. And there's 2 things you can never lose when it comes to disciplining your child. First, you can never lose your temper. And that's sometimes hard to do, right? But again, I can't correct somebody for a lack of self-control if I don't have self-control. It just doesn't work. Another thing that you can never lose when it comes to discipline, and this is maybe the harder one, is I can't lose determination. I cannot lose determination. And oftentimes, we don't want to lose our temper, so we lose our determination, right? I just can't do it, right? I need to give up. Sometimes it's hard to discipline consistently. But here's what I want to say about that. If you start a battle with your child, make sure you win that battle. Make sure you win that battle. Because when you win the battle, guess who wins? Your child wins. My mom and my sister, when I was growing up, she's 7 years older than me, they had battles in our house. I remember laying in bed, and she had the room next door, and it was, and here's the thing about that. When my mom entered into a battle, it was based on something that my mom truly believed was about what God wanted for my sister, what was best for her as a person. And for my mom to lose that battle, or for me to lose that battle with my kids, or for you to lose that battle with your kids, makes them lose. And my sister now, who is an adult and is exactly what God would want her to be, it's because mom said, I'm not losing these battles. So we can't lose our temper. We can't lose our determination. Number 4, vigilant discipline requires consistent. I must be consistent. Your consistency regulates their consistency. And this is, I think, the oblivious zone for parents. This is the blind spot, right? Parents are like, oh, we're super consistent with our kids. We work really hard at being consistent. And their kids are standing back behind them going, no, they're not. We got them, right? Your kids are constantly doing calculations. And you probably did this as a child as well, right? You're thinking, should I do this? Well, I only get caught like 1 out of every 10 times. And then half of the time when I get caught, mom spanks me, and that doesn't really hurt. And then the other half of the time, I can talk dad out of spanking me. So I got like a 3.5% chance of actually paying a real penalty for what I'm about to do. I'll take those odds, right? There's that calculation going on. Can I get by with this? And it's your consistency in how you discipline that will determine if they're consistent in obeying or not. So just make sure that you're consistent. Got a great story about Theodore Roosevelt, but I don't have time to tell it. But look it up. Theodore Roosevelt, no, I'm not going to tell it. But here's the deal, right? You come home from work, or you've been working around the house all day long, and you're cooking dinner, and stuff's going on with the kids, and you're just like, I can't deal with this right now, right? I'm just tired. Or it's bedtime, and they're out messing around and doing what they're not supposed to do, and you're like, I'm just going to pretend I don't hear it, because you're exhausted, right? Here's the thing. Negligence can result in death. And so no matter what's going on, no matter how busy you are, no matter how tired you are, you should never be too busy or too tired to be consistent with your children. So what does that mean? It means don't threaten them, right? We have had a history in our house of, if you do that again, you're not whatever. And then they do it again and we're like, oh shoot, what have we done, right? We weren't ready to live up to the threat. And then you got to figure out what to do from there. So don't threaten. Don't make excuses for them. Don't make exceptions for them. I used to work at Oklahoma Christian, like Mike said, and we would have students get in trouble, and their parents of 21-year-old adults would call and try to get them out of trouble. It's like, what is your problem? That's why your 21-year-old adult is doing what they're doing, because you've excused them and you've made exceptions. Don't procrastinate. Any of you procrastinate in discipline? You say, well, what does that look like? It says, I'm going to count to 3, right? That's my favorite thing. I was at Walmart the other day, right before Christmas, and I checked out and I was leaving, and this lady, they had all the toys set up right in front, and so her little daughter was over there playing with the toys. She's like, Brindley, it's time to go, and Brindley's just playing away, and she's like, Brindley, come on, we got to go. Brindley just ignores her. So she just keeps pleading, and she's like 20 feet away from Brindley. And then finally she goes, Brindley, 1. And I'm like, set my bags down. I'm like, I gotta watch this. and then she keeps, Brindley, I said 1. I'm thinking 1 and 1. We should be at 2 by now, right? And like 2 minutes go by. And then finally she's like, 2. And I'm like, she forgot about 1 3 minutes ago. So finally, she keeps going, and then she does my favorite thing, 2.5, and I'm about to lose it. I'm like, 3! Just say 3, And And guess what? She finally got to 3, and guess what Brinley did? The exact same thing she did at 1. Wrong. Make sure we're consistent. Ecclesiastes 8:11, whenever a sentence for a crime is not carried out swiftly, the human mind becomes determined to commit evil. It just reinforces what they've done. All right, lastly, if I'm going to be vigilant in my discipline, I've got to be caring. I've got to be caring. If I don't care deeply, I cannot correct effectively. Hebrews 12:10, God disciplines us for our own good. It's not to hurt us. It's not to show us that He's in control. It's for our own good. When you discipline your child, you do not do it for you. You do it for them. You do it because you love them. And if you don't do it, it's selfishness on your part. So we've got to love very, very, very carefully. The goal of discipleship is not to humiliate them, it's to help them. So don't do it in public. If you can help it, do it in private. The goal of discipline is not to please somebody else. It's to make your child like Jesus. It's discipleship. And so here's the last thing I want to end with. I want you to imagine that life with your kids is just traveling down a road together. And you're on this road, go to the next one, and there's ditches on either side of the road. And at the end of the road is this blessed life, this incredible life. But if you get into either ditch and you stay there, you and your child will never make it to this land of blessing. On one side is abusive discipline, where the parent is inconsistent, and they discipline out of selfishness and anger and resentment. And perhaps some of you experience that in your life. Maybe you had a parent that was out of control, or you had the proverbial drunken father or drunken mother that would beat you. And if that's the case, I'm very, very sorry for that. And they didn't do that. They didn't do it because they loved you, and they didn't do that because they hated you. They did it because they hated themselves. But if you're not careful, what you will do is you'll respond to that in such a way that you'll take that abusive discipline and you'll go, I'm never going to do that. And the pendulum will swing all the way across to the other side of the road where you just don't discipline your child. But again, you're not disciplining them because you love them. You're not disciplining them because you don't want to be viewed like your parents were. Or like culture talks about what discipline is like. And Satan has taken all of those things and twisted them in our minds to leave us stranded in the ditch. But here's what I want to say. Right down the middle of that road is a path to life. And it's where love and discipline are in complete and perfect harmony. And the result is an incredible opportunity of blessing for both you as a parent and your child as they grow, as they become what God wants them to be. I'm sorry I'm over my time, but thank you guys for your attention. God bless you, and enjoy the rest of the semester.